Hello, everybody. So today the High Court issued a ruling on the Assange extradition, right? So I've been covering Assange's extradition case since 2020. I've been accredited to cover the extradition hearing, the all the rulings and everything. And now we're at the point where the judge in January said no extradition to the U.S. because of health grounds, because U.S. prison conditions are too oppressive and they would drive Assange to commit suicide. And the United States appealed that in October, and today we had the decision. Now, the decision was in favor of the United States. Very bad for Assange. And I was at the court hearing. I attended it remotely. So, because, you have a 5.5 million news outlets posting about this court ruling, but I can assure you there were probably like 20 people there. So here's what happened. I had a live thread going, and I'm going to show it to you. This is basically from 10:15 a.m. 10:15 a.m. London time. That's when we had everything go down. Now, it was very brief. This whole thing was about 9 minutes. Just to put that into perspective, about 9 minutes. And as I told you, the United States appealed on 5 grounds. Here are the 5 grounds, okay? And this is what the court ruled. The court ruled that the United States cannot appeal on grounds, I'm going to read them to you right here. So grounds 1, 4, and 5, right? Here you go. This is the whole ruling, okay? So, excuse me, the appeal on grounds 1, 3, and 4 is dismissed. Excuse me, because they're actually in letters. I'll show you in a second. They've written them in letters, but in the court they refer to them as numbers. So, what does that mean, 1, 3, and 4? I'm going to explain this to you, okay? The United States over here said that Julian Assange is not sick. He's not suicidal. They said the judge made a mistake in her, when she said that he meets the threshold that the extradition is oppressive. So they said that she made a mistake under Section 91. They said that the medical evidence provided by Professor Koppelman, they made a whole scandal out of this. You remember they said that, well, he didn't say in his psychiatric evaluation that Stella Morris and Assange have a relationship. I mean, that has nothing to do with the medical evidence, but nonetheless, this was the grounds of appeal. They wanted to contest all of his medical evidence in terms of weight and admissibility. So today, the High Court threw all of this out. They said they accepted that there is a real risk of suicide if Assange is extradited. They accepted the medical testimony from Professor Koppelman. So all the medical stuff is fine. This has stayed. The High Court has ruled that this is correct, and they didn't allow the United States to appeal on these grounds. They did, however, allow the United States to appeal on 2 of the 5 grounds. I'm going to show them to you, right? So one of them was that the judge should have allowed the United States to give these assurances before, right? The United States have given diplomatic assurances. They said, well, you think Assange is suicidal because we're going to put him in special administrative measures and very bad prison conditions. Don't worry, we're not going to put him in special administrative measures. We're not going to send him to ADX Florence. He can even serve his sentence in Australia. These are the assurances, right? And they said the judge was unfair because she didn't tell them about her provisional view. She didn't give the United States the opportunity to provide these assurances, right? So that was allowed. That was allowed. They accepted that the Judge Bretzer, should have allowed the U.S. to give these assurances before. And the other point, they accepted the assurances themselves. And man, I mean, I don't need to tell you why this is very, very, very bad. Just so you can see here, I'm going to read to you because this is, I was typing away, mashing away while they were reading this because, like I said, it was just 9 minutes in total, something like that. And they said the court is satisfied that these assurances, these diplomatic assurances, exclude the possibility Assange could be placed in SAMS or held at maximum security in ADX Florence, either pre-trial or after any conviction. And here you go. Here's the disclaimer. Unless after entry of these assurances, he commits any future act that meets the test for the imposition of SAMS. Which I'll get to why this is so bad. I mean, I've explained it 100 times, but I'm just telling you what the court said. And they said that the United States will consent to an application by Assange if he's convicted to go to Australia to serve his sentence. So the court accepts these assurances from the U.S. They said this is okay. right? And also that while he's in U.S. custody, that the U.S. will make sure he receives appropriate clinical and psychological treatment as recommended by qualified medical personnel at the prison where he will be held. Okay, and they said that the court rejects the various criticisms on Assange's behalf about these assurances and is satisfied. The court is satisfied that these assurances are sufficient to quell the concerns of Judge Bretzer when she blocked the extradition in July. Okay? And the court therefore allows the appeal and orders that it be remitted to Westminster Magistrates Court with the direction that the district judge, meaning Vanessa Bretzer, sends the case to the Secretary of State. Okay, because in England, when there's an extradition, the final okay, it has to come from the Home Secretary or Secretary of State. In this case, that's Priti Patel. I'm not going to say anything. So, there we go. The appeal on grounds 1, 3, and 4 is dismissed. That's gone. Okay. And the appeal on grounds 2 and 5 is allowed, as I just mentioned. Now, I want to show you a tweet from Stella Morris because many people have been asking, what happens now? What happens next? This is what happens next. So, this is a statement from Assange's solicitors, from his attorneys, following the High Court decision, and they will be seeking leave to appeal the High Court's decision at the Supreme Court. Okay, so I'm just going to read you this very briefly. It says, regarding the United States of America versus Julian Assange, the decision of the High Court today has rejected 3 grounds of appeal argued by the USA. It upholds the judgment of District Judge Bretzer as correct. On the basis of all that she heard, it would be oppressive to extradite Mr. Assange to the USA, given his mental health and the harsh conditions he would face in U.S. prison. The High Court allowed part of the U.S. appeal, which provides assurances which were given after the evidential hearing by the district judge and only after Judge Bretzer's judgment. Because remember, Bretzer ruled in January 4th, I was there, that the extradition is blocked. These assurances, as the High Court said today, they came on February 5th. So a whole month after she'd already given the ruling. You know, some judges might say that, you know, this is fresh evidence and you can't submit that. And anyway, I'm just telling you what happened, right? So the ruling was on January 4th and these assurances came in February 5th. And that's what they're saying in this letter. And they're saying, on behalf of Mr. Assange, his lawyers will be seeking permission to appeal this decision to the Supreme Court. The application to do so has been made in writing, has to be made in writing within 14 days. Any such appeal to the Supreme Court would relate to the question of the assurances. Appeals on other important questions, including questions of free speech and on the political motivations of the U.S. extradition request, have yet to be considered by an appeal court. So, just to make this very clear, the High Court accepted Assange is suffering from mental illness. They accepted that if he is extradited to the U.S., the prison conditions are so bad that it would drive him to commit suicide. They accepted all this, and they found nothing wrong with the medical testimony from Professor Koppelman. And they didn't allow the U.S. to appeal these things. What the High Court did accept, they accepted that the judge should have told the U.S. about her provisional view in order to allow the U.S. to offer these diplomatic assurances, and they accepted the diplomatic assurances, which is the most important point. And here we come to the big issue, because you guys know that I wrote an article just a week ago about David Mendoza's extradition. Now, David Mendoza was extradited from Spain to the United States in April 2009, and he was also given diplomatic assurances. Right? They also said, you can go back to your home country, although Mendoza's both a U.S. and Spanish national, but he was living in Spain. And they said, you can go back to Spain to serve your sentence, which is just like what they're telling Assange. You can go to Australia, to your home country, to serve your sentence. Okay? And the problem is, they didn't really say that in the assurance. Let me show you the assurance again. It doesn't actually say that. So here's the diplomatic note from the U.S. Embassy in Madrid. Okay? And it says that they don't object. So they say the U.S. does not object to Mendoza making an application to serve his sentence in Spain. That's not the same thing as we'll send Mendoza back to Spain. That's completely different. And with Assange, what do the assurances to Assange say? They don't say, we will never put Assange in special administrative measures. They say this. They say they won't put him in SAMs unless in the event that after entry of this assurance, he was to commit any future act that met the test for the imposition of a SAM. Whatever that means. I mean, that's quite ambiguous, isn't it? And of course, the CIA has input on, along with the Attorney General, on who is placed in SAMs. Now, the whole High Court hearing today, the whole High Court decision, the whole High Court judgment hinges on these diplomatic assurances. Can they be trusted? I have David Mendoza here with me today. David, how are you doing?
Hi, Richard. I'm doing fine. Thank you.
It's great to speak with you. I should probably tell the viewers that we did film an interview on video, which is being edited right now, and it should be uploaded in the next days. A very long interview, and I, of course, interviewed you multiple times for the article that I wrote. Can I just get your reaction to this ruling? What do you think of the High Court, the English High Court, accepting the diplomatic assurances given to Assange, very similar to the assurances you were given when you were extradited to the U.S.?
Well, quite honestly, for me, it's a sad day for justice. Apart from the fact that I don't think journalism should be prosecuted, they don't specify, the High Court does not specify the type of assurances that would require the Americans' fulfillment of these assurances that they've given. In my case, they gave the same assurances. Initially, they gave very ambiguous and very vague assurances. When I was prior to extradition, the court saw this, and a secondary court said, no, that doesn't work. We want a very, very, very specific contract signed by all parties. It's called a deed of surrender, an acta de entrega. I have it right here.
Right.
Everybody signed it. Me, the Spaniards, and the U.S. Embassy. And I remind you, it's that same U.S. Embassy, the same individual who hands out those assurances by diplomatic note. That said, once I was in U.S. jurisdiction, they told me, no, you're not going back. And to fight my return back took me almost 7 years being incarcerated there. And I see a lot of loopholes that they're going to do with Julian's case. We can get into that if you'd like.
So, David, just to be clear, I've explained this in the article, but I just to have you, corroborate it and reaffirm this. The United States gave you these diplomatic assurances, right? And then you took them to the court, as you said, and the court found them to be too ambiguous, right? So these diplomatic assurances, which are right here, I just put them up on the screen. They were so ambiguous and so vague that Spain said, "Hey, you need to give us something clearer than that. This is not going to fly. This thing over here." And so that's why they came up with the contract. They came up with the acta de entrega, where you all signed it, right? And the acta de entrega is even more explicit, correct?
That's correct. It's not only just more explicit, it's very precise. Everything that happened that day, and if you look at the acta de entrega, if you can pull that back up, you will see on the left-hand side is a squiggle mark, right there on the left-hand side of the document. The diplomat, the Spanish diplomat, asked everybody very directly. That's the U.S. Embassy representative, Kimberly Weiss, that was me, and the Spanish diplomatic official. There was 2 Spanish diplomatic officials there who had to sign this. But they asked us very specifically, do you understand what you are signing? And it contains everything within this document. And that's why that squiggle line you see up and down the document is there. Everybody had to say who signed the document, yes. And like I said, it's very, very specific. But once in U.S. jurisdiction, both the Spanish and the U.S. authorities refused to give me this document in order to force my return back to Spain.
What did they tell you when you asked for the document?
That it was diplomatic communication, and I was not privy to it. I was not allowed to it. Even though I signed the document, I was present during this signing of this document, and they refused to give it to me. Both executives, that's both the Spanish and the U.S.
So they ended up giving you a copy of it, though. Can you tell us about the copy they did give you of the acta de entrega?
Yeah, they gave me a secondary copy that was this one. It's
Right.
the one on the right on your screen there that does not have my signature on it. They were capable of giving me that diplomatic communication, but they weren't capable of giving me the one which I signed. And there's a specific reason, and there's an intent for that. The reason is because if I'm not signatory of that agreement, I cannot go into court and force claim or failure to comply with the contract. And that's specifically why they did not give me the first acta de entrega, the one that I actually signed and I knew I had signed.
Right.
They refused to give it to me. I was fortunate that I had a Spanish judge anonymously send me this contract and a bunch of other documents. I was very fortunate. It took 6.5 years, but I got it.
So the logic here is that if you don't have a piece of paper that you signed and the U.S. signed, you're screwed. You have no claim in court.
That's correct. What the precedence is in U.S. federal court, when you have a extradition treaty, you are not signature to that extradition treaty. The only persons or groups that can contest failure or compliance of that treaty or non-compliance are those who are signatories on that treaty. And that's why my sentencing judge said, well, you know what? There might be those conditions or there may not, but you have no claim to it because you're not signatory on it. And that's when I knew the game was up. I mean, I knew I had a serious problem on my hands then.
So, the extradition treaty under which you were extradited, that's between Spain and the U.S. Assange would be extradited under the UK and US extradition treaty. This is from 2003. And so if Assange gets to the United States and they either put him in SAMS or they send him to ADX or they say, no, you can't go to Australia anymore, and he wants to contest that, he can't go to the US court because he didn't sign anything with the US. And the only other option is what?
Well,
the UK.
Yeah, it would be the UK. He can go into US court, but I can tell you what the US court's going to tell him, exactly what they told me. You're not signatory yet, you have no claim to it. So Assange would have to go to the UK, force the UK to enforce those conditions. Now, we have to understand also the assurances given by the Americans in Assange's case. I've seen this. I represented quite a few Canadians who had the exact same condition as Assange in federal prison. And I'm talking about dozens of them that were extradited out of Canada with the assurance by the Americans that they could serve their sentence in the United States back in Canada. Mm-hmm. Well, I can tell you specifically, I'm assisting one kid right now with that. And he's been 12 years in the United States waiting for his transfer back to Canada. I don't know if you know what the instrument that allows the transfer, but it's called the Strasbourg Treaty Transfer. And it's very specific. And I can tell you what the Americans are doing here. They're playing a simple game. That treaty transfer instrument, Article 3F, requires all parties to agree to the transfer. If one of the parties disagrees with the transfer, Assange is not going to Australia. Now, the Americans can give their assurances, which they have done, that Assange will go. Assange obviously will say, yes, I want to go to Australia. But what about the Aussies? They can say, you know what, we don't feel right now that's time for you to come to Australia. So that needs to be determined or at least secured prior to Assange leaving for the United States. Otherwise, I can assure you, it will be decades before he gets home.
I believe this is the section you're talking about. So it's Article 3, 3.F, and it says that a sentenced person may be transferred under this convention only on the following conditions. And then F says, on the condition if the sentencing and administering states agree to the transfer. So that means, as you just pointed out, Australia has to agree as well. And so far, only the US has agreed, but Australia have said nothing. So what does that mean for Assange?
That's correct. It means that the condition is absolutely worthless. They must attach, and this is a game. This is predetermined game that the Americans have done here. Believe me when I tell you this, because I've seen it dozens of times. And their response is in federal court, we've complied with our position. We said yes, but the treaty requires the Australians to say yes. And until you get that yes from Australia, he's not going to Australia. I can tell you that right now. And they know it. They know it. They know the game that's being played here. Secondly, I would like to tell you that any assurances need to include that if these assurances are not fulfilled by any party, whether not fulfilled by the Americans or by Assange or whoever, that all parties have recourse, even if they're not signatories, onto the treaty. That means if the Americans are not compliant with their assurances, Assange has some sort of recourse, both in U.S. court and in British courts.
Yep. So, because that's the game they played with you, right? They said you're not a signatory to the treaty, you have no claim. So, Assange would need to have himself included in these assurances as a non-signatory party, so he can contest it in court if they don't abide by it, right?
That's correct, and that was what was so valuable in my case. That I knew I had a secondary document with my signature on it, and that's really what put them in a corner. Also, I had the support of justices within the Spanish judiciary that had enough of the Americans' game, and they were pissed. And when I got the rulings out of the Supreme Court in Spain that they were violating my human rights, I think they started to realize that it wasn't worth holding Mendoza in a U.S. federal prison and losing possibilities of future extraditions.
Right, because you know, we were talking the other day about the Supreme Court rulings. You won twice in the Spanish Supreme Court. I don't know if anyone's ever done that in any country. So, you know, that's absolutely incredible. And the Spanish Supreme Court found that, number one, the conditions of your extradition had been violated. That was one complaint, one suit that you filed. And the other one was that your human rights had been violated. And the result of this, one of the results, was that the Spain-U.S. extradition treaty was basically it was at risk of being suspended, right? And that you think is what put the most pressure on the Americans, right? They were afraid that the extradition treaty between Spain and the U.S. would be suspended, and that's why they let you go back.
That's correct. There was a two-prong battle I learned when I was in federal prison. One was obviously the signatory battle, which I had that acta de entrega. So I took the U.S. to civil court. Eric Holder, Obama's attorney general at the time, I took him to civil court. I said, failure to comply with the contract. Believe me, they were scared about that. They weren't happy that actually got into court. So I know that put them against the wall a little bit. But what they feared the most was these two Supreme Court rulings out of Spain. That if the Spanish executive, because the Spanish executive at the time was a conservative government, the Partido Popular. So they had very good, tight relationships with the Americans. Mm-hmm. And they basically said, you're not coming back. I had visits from the consulate, from the ambassador, and they point blank told me, Americans don't want to send you back, you're not going back. And I said, well, that might be your position, but we'll see what the Spanish court's position is on this one. The Americans gave assurances, they signed a contract, and they're going to comply with that contract as they force everybody else to comply with theirs. And I was fortunate. The Supreme Court made it very clear that the Spanish executive did absolutely nothing for me. They sent 2 diplomatic notes in a period of almost 7 years saying, please, would you please send Mendoza back? And they only did that two.
So Spain asked for you back 2 times in total. That's it.
Yep. In a period of almost 7 years, Richard, in a period of almost 7 years. And so the court finally said, or you take the Supreme Court, or you take the necessary diplomatic actions to get him back, or we'll take the diplomatic the actions to get him back. And they basically implied that if the executive could not fulfill the compliance of the court, that they would suspend the extradition between Spain and the United States. And the United States feared that tremendously. Not just the United States, the Spanish executive feared that tremendously, because it's not a quick process to get it back in, reinstated. It has to go through Congress here in Spain, and then there's public debate. It gets seen through Europe. The Americans like doing this always under the radar. And they did this all the whole time under the radar with me. I can see exactly what they're going to do with Assange. They're not committing Australia's commitment to getting him back. That's required for that assurance to have any value. Also, to really make sure that any of these assurances have any value, the British court needs to require a diplomatic note that states Assange can challenge any non-compliance of the extradition conditions.
Right. And I mean, let's just look a bit more closely at the assurance itself, because I read it just a few minutes ago. We've looked at it many times. It says that Assange won't be placed in SAMs unless he were to do something that met the test for an imposition of a SAM. So, I mean, does that strike you as ambiguous?
It does. It leaves the door completely wide open. Let me give you an example of people that have been in a facility. I was in a medium-high facility, which is what in Colorado. It was very close to where Julian will probably end up ADX if that door is left open. Let me give you an example of that. You're on your phone call, like I was with a family relative, my mom. And I say to my mom on that phone call from prison, tell my buddy that he needs to go see my attorney. Well, that in itself, the prison monitoring system kicks it back to security, their high level of review. And that simple comment would put him in a facility, probably ADX.
Right. So the threshold is very low.
Very low. Very low.
And I mean, you were, as you said, you were in Englewood in Colorado, and you were. I mean, this prison is very close to ADX Florence. You were in a medium to high security prison, right? Could you tell us a bit more about those conditions, what it was like? Because I think the viewers would get a better picture, perhaps, of what it's like.
Well, it's you've got a little bit more freedom than they do at an ADX, but it's 23-hour lockdown. You have a 1 hour of what they call recreation, and it's when they decide, not when you decide. So if they feel like you're being a pain in the ass, or you're not complying with what they ask you to do, they can tell you at 3 a.m, do you want your rec? Because that's required. They have to give you 1 hour. It's required by the Supreme Court, a Supreme Court ruling. I forget the name of the ruling, but if they can tell you at 3 a.m, they'll wake you up and say you want your 1 hour. And obviously at 3 a.m, who's going to want to go out to the rec yard? So you say no. Well, guess what? They continue to do that until they get out of you or get compliance of what they want out of you, until you submit to what they want.
And I mean, in terms of visitations, being able to see your family, the whole point why Spain imposed this condition that you have to be serving any prison sentence in Spain is so you could be close to your family, right? Because that's, under the European Convention on Human Rights. And you were in the U.S. 6 years and 9 months in violation of the diplomatic assurances. What did that do to your personal relationships? What happened?
Well, first of all, the condition that the Spanish Supreme Court said was violating my human rights, the Americans were successful on destroying my family. That condition was imposed so my children or at the time, my wife would not suffer for what I had done. My wife, after 3.5 years in federal prison, divorced me. I understand why. It was a lengthy sentence. Her visitations had to be approved every time she would come down. She's Canadian. My children do not call me dad. They call me Dave. Just gives you an example of the destruction that this does. And they were successful. They were successful at doing this.
So, the idea that, because you were talking about your wife visiting you, for example, and I don't think I try to put as much info as I can in the article, but I think one thing that I wanted you to elaborate on is, you asked to be sent to Sheridan, Oregon, I think, at the facility there, so you could be closer to your parents. What happened when you did that?
That's correct. My mom was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, pancreatic cancer. So I asked the facility and and the Spanish embassy, could you please place a little bit of pressure? It's the same type of prison. It's a medium-high prison in Sheridan, Oregon. It was literally 100 miles away from my parents, where my parents live, Seattle, Washington. And I got a response back from the federal prison system that yes, we're going to send you closer to your family. Well, when we signed all the documents, I thought, great. I told my mom, don't worry, I'm going to be seeing you shortly, because she could not get on flights at that point of her illness. At any rate, we were all celebrating the fact that I would be heading to Sheridan, Oregon. My case manager at the time said, it's all done, you'll be gone there. I ended up on going to they have a transfer center where they send all of the federal prisoners when they do transfers around the United States. It's kind of it's surreal. It's their own federal airport facility, and there's literally thousands and thousands of federal inmates. They call it Con Air, where the flights come in and out. Anyway, it's called El Reno. It's their distribution center. Well, when you get to El Reno, they do a review of you. You get there, they ask you. There's a temporary psychologist there and a case manager there, and they ask you, where you're going? And I said, yeah, I know where I'm going. I'm going to Sheridan, Oregon. And one looked at the other and kind of looked at me and said, no, you're going to Fort Dix. And I said, Fort Dix? Where in the heck is Fort Dix at? And that was in New Jersey. So literally, they sent me to the prison as far away from my family as they possibly could. Well, within that time frame, I spent about 4 years in Fort Dix. During that 4-year stay, I wasn't able. Both my parents passed away, and I wasn't able to either see them.
I'm sorry.
Hug them. It's just part of life. I mean, but it just shows you the deviance of these people, and it shows you the games they want to play, and they were almost taking my battle with them personally, and I was just asking them to apply the law, apply the conditions, apply your assurances, apply the contract that you signed, and they were going to teach me a lesson, and I just feel really bad for Julian, really bad. I think and I'm a nobody, Richard. I've told you this before. In the geopolitical game, I'm an absolute nobody. You can, and they were capable of doing this to me. You can imagine what they're going to do to Julian.
I mean, I understand your sentiment, but on the one hand, do you feel that they were testing the waters as well with how far they can push Spain, how far they can push extraditions of Europeans from Europe to the U.S.? Do you think there was also an element of that to it?
Oh, no doubt, no doubt. One of the things like I said, I spent 7 years, nearly 7 years, 6 years, 9 months in U.S. prison. Every day of those years I spent in their law library, understanding extraditions, understanding the games that they play. And they've been doing what they did to me. They've been doing to the Central Americans, South Americans, Mexicans for decades, literally. And those countries just have not fought for their citizens. I have a suspicion they wanted to try it on the Europeans and see if it would fly. Initially, it did fly, but I was fortunate to have sufficient enough money to take this to the Spanish Supreme Court. Can you imagine if I didn't have that money? I would still be in a U.S. prison right now.
I asked you, how much did you spend on lawyers? Just trying to get back to Spain. And what was the figure again?
A lot, between about $220,000 to $250,000. A lot of money.
So this is $250,000, or in the best case, $220,000, just trying to get the United States to abide by the conditions of your extradition, by the contract that is signed, this contract, the Acta de Entrega.
That's correct. That's correct. Not only that, when I got to the United States, there was a building of mine that was worth considerable amount of money, well over $2 million, that wasn't forfeited or seized. The Americans really wanted this building. So they came in an arbitration hearing, they made me an offer. Said, you give us this building and we will not oppose your transfer back to Spain. Initially, I said no. I said, unless you put this in writing, I'm not agreeing to that. I don't trust one thing of what you guys say. Anyway, at arbitration hearings, there is no stenographer. There is no recording, because within arbitration hearings in the United States, some people like to cooperate and sometimes they pull back on those cooperation agreements. Or the American or the U.S. Prosecutor likes to make offers that they don't want the public to hear or know of or have record of. So I understand there was no, but the judge at that time, Ricardo Martinez, the magistrate, when I told him, I'm not going to agree to this unless it's in writing. He said, Dave, I'm here to make sure that the U.S. government complies with this agreement. Ultimately, my wife at the time, now my ex-wife, my wife said, Dave, what's more important to you, your buildings or your family? That hit me right in the heart. And I said, okay, give them the building. And so we gave them the building. Well, guess what? They got a building that was worth $2 million minimally, and didn't send me back, refused to send me back. You know, and they can make any argument they wanted to, which they attempted to do in court when we brought this into civil court. Oh, well, we really didn't agree to that. Well, I said, well, then why would I give you a $2 million building? Just because I'm a nice guy? It wasn't seized. There had to have been some sort of exchange on here. What was that exchange? The U.S. prosecutor just kept her mouth quiet. And I just thought to myself, this is a deviant, evil game these people play. And it's all about winning. It's all about money. It's all about getting their what they call their props there, you know, within their peers. It's shameful. It's shameful. It's just like this guy, Lewis, who represented to the British courts. Oh, well, don't worry. Mendoza came back. Well, he's being dishonest.
Right. So at the High Court, Assange's lawyers brought your case up as proof, as evidence that the U.S. does not abide by its assurances. And the response from James Lewis, who's the lead U.S. prosecutor, his response, well, he said, well, in the end, Mendoza was allowed to return to Spain. I mean, what is your reaction to that?
Absolutely disgusting. I mean, I understand a good battle. I understand a good attorney, but attorneys have a responsibility to be honest to the courts. And that man has been dishonest to the court, at least within my case. I find it of great offense, you know, because this attorney knew exactly, or at least had understanding of my case. He knew that they didn't send me back voluntarily. I came back. The only reason I came back to Spain is because I forced it. Otherwise, I would still be rotting in a U.S. prison right now. And what he said to the High Court there, I don't know. I don't have words for it, but it's disgusting that these people will say and do anything to win their case. It really is. I thought we would have a better society than this, but obviously, you know, it gets perturbed. I mean, It's not right.
And David, when you got back from the U.S., when they finally sent you to Spain, you had spent almost 7 years in Spain, and in Spain, you would have gotten 6 years for as an equivalent sentence, because they gave you 14 years in the U.S., but in Spain it would have been 6. What did Grande Marlaska? Grande Marlaska is now the Interior Minister in Spain, but he was judge in your case. What did he tell you when you came back from the U.S.?
Well, when we see how law works in every country, I mean, every democratic country, is the day you're sentenced, it's the law of that day that needs to apply. So that is to say, once you're sentenced, 5 years later, if they increase the punishment for that crime, they're not going to drag you back into court and give you additional time. That's law 101. I was sentenced in 2009. My crime of distribution and possession of marijuana occurred, the acts occurred from 2004 to 2006, roughly. Once I got back to Spain, now I remind you, the Spanish Supreme Court ruled in my favor that I should have been back when I applied for my transfer in 2009. Well, in the process of them denying me transfers, the United States and the Spanish executive not doing anything for me, the laws in Spain, and I think it was 2012 or 13 or 14, changed for my crime. Instead of 6 years, they were allowed to give me 15 years. So when I get back to Spain, I finally get back to Spain, the judge, Grande Marlaska, had told my attorney, don't worry, Dave's going home because we have to apply the law of the time. Okay. About 3 or 4 days later, my attorney goes back for some reason in front of the judge to prepare for our hearing. And the judge says, nope, he's going to do his full 14 years. My attorney said, well, how can that be? The law at the time is a maximum of 6 years. So no, it's when the time he arrives to Spain is when we're going to apply the law here. So in essence, he was contradicting what the Supreme Court had founded, because now he's applying the law of 2015 or 14 or whenever the heck it was for a crime from 2006. And my sentencing was in 2009. So unfortunately, I had to do 2/3 of my sentence here in Spain, because for nonviolent crimes, they allow you to go under home and conditional release after 2/3 of the time. But I was very, very fortunate. I submitted an application to the United Nations Convention of Political and Civil Rights, and they accepted it. We're hoping for a ruling soon here. It just shows you the deviance of all this.
So you submitted a complaint against Spain because, as you just explained, they're punishing you retroactively. They're giving you a sentence from 2015 for a crime that you were convicted of in 2009. And so instead of, you already did 7 years, close to 7 years in the U.S. Usually, if they had sent you back on time, the Americans, you would have gotten to Spain and did the 6 years. But you spent the 6 years, 9 months in the U.S. You were held in violation of the diplomatic assurances. And then they send you back in 2015. So you've already done those 6 years. You should have been a free man. And then in 3 days, in the span of 3 days, the judge changes his mind and says he wants you to do the full bid. Why do you think he changed his mind like that?
It's clear. It's very clear. The Americans were pissed. The Americans, in particular, the U.S. Embassy in Madrid, that I called them out on this, that I took it all the way to the top. I was fortunate to have the financial ability to do so. They were pissed, and they went to that judge. I have no doubt whatsoever. Ex parte communication is okay, is valid in Spain with these judges. Ex parte communication is behind the door communications by these guys. And I have no doubt whatsoever that that's what happened. There's an individual here by the name of Kimberly Weiss who signed my acta de entrega, my deed of surrender. She deals directly with the judges. She deals directly with the prosecutors. She deals directly with the the police. There's a lot of manipulation by the U.S. Embassy, as I suspect in the same as the Assange case within the British environment. There's a lot of manipulation of the judiciary.
Yeah, she said in that video, she says, quote, "I know the police, I know the prosecutors." Well, what did you make of that?
She wasn't kidding. She does. She was not kidding.
So you think that is in, I mean, it's kind of a rhetorical question, but you think that the games that the U.S. plays in the Spanish judiciary, they're doing the same in the UK with Assange, right? Because the idea is that, well, you know, there's a special relationship between the UK and the US. You know, the UK is also a Five Eyes country with the US. But who do you think is giving the orders here? Because, you know, if the law were followed, perhaps we'd have a different outcome in the judiciary. But you think that basically they're manipulating, the Americans are manipulating the UK judiciary the same they're doing in your case, or did in your case in Spain?
I have no doubt about it, Richard. I really have no doubt about it. It's clear to me just by this Lewis character, how he represented my case. They know exactly what they're doing. They know exactly the strings are pulling. You know, I find it a little bit odd that, you know, there was a case very similar to mine out of the same court out of Seattle, Washington, Linda and Michael Mastro. I don't know if you're familiar with that case. I spoke about it briefly on the channel, but take it away. You tell us what it is. Okay. All right. Well, when I was in federal prison, I used to get the newspaper there. And I saw that these two individuals were being requested for extradition out of France. So I wrote their attorneys, and these two individuals, Michael and Linda Mastro, is some sort of property fraud. It was a couple $100 million they were claiming in 2009 or 2010. They were requesting their extradition. And I wrote their attorneys in France because the Americans sent assurances to France that were very ambiguous. Their attorneys came and actually visited me in federal prison. Asked me for all the documentation. I gave them a summation of what happened to me. It was the same U.S. prosecuting office, Jenny Durkin's office, out of the Western District of Seattle, that were sending these ambiguous assurances to the French courts. Well, when they took it to the second level, kind of like Assange just did here in the British courts, the second level, or the appellate court in France, threw the extradition out and just flat out said, the Americans can't be trusted on ambiguous assurances because of this Mendoza case very specifically demonstrates that. It shocks me that I don't know if Julian's attorneys were able to submit my case as clearly as you've made it out to be to the court, but I can assure you that it would be wise of them to do that now when it gets kicked back to the lower courts.
Yeah, so when the High Court heard about your case, I mean, that was about a minute or two, and it was mentioned alongside Abu Hamza and alongside someone else, Aswad, I think, who you know had their assurances or promises violated. I mean, honestly speaking, these documents, you know, your case in general, the way I've exposed it, we haven't seen that in court yet, perhaps. I mean, do you think that if it goes to the Supreme Court and, you know, this decision is appealed by Assange's lawyers, do you think that given all the evidence that, you know, I published in the article, the evidence from your case, do you think that that could compel the UK to stop the Assange extradition, or do you think that even, you know, no matter what, they're gonna let it go through?
My gut feeling, Richard, is that it won't stop his extradition, but it may require them to give, nothing's 100%, but to give assurances that are going to be a lot more solid than what they would generally give. I'm hoping for at least that. You know, I honestly, I really feel bad about Julian I see exactly what they're going to do to him. And the courts need to protect him. I mean, if they're willing to accept these assurances, they better be damn willing to make sure that those assurances are fulfilled. And it's important to get this out in front of the public now, so later down the road, they can't say, well, these issues weren't brought up. Well, yeah, the issues are brought up. I think it's imperative that the Supreme Court understands my case and understands the requirement of assurances and how they need to be fulfilled to make them valid.
But David, you say you hope that at least they would give some tighter, stronger guarantees. The thing is, they did in your case. They had to sign a contract and they still violated it. So, I mean, even if they did that, what do you think the result would be once Assange sets foot in U.S. jurisdiction?
Well, if they do that, I think the American judiciary is a very deviant system. They demand responsibility from us, but they never give responsibility, or what they like to say, accountability for their actions. That word was used continuously in my trial and my sentencing, accountability for my actions. They rarely do that, if ever. I don't think I've ever had an apology from either the Spanish executive or the Americans, or even the U.S. Embassy. I was there not too long ago. But at any rate, their system is very, 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 very cruel. I would hope that the public's attention to this would try to keep that a little bit balanced. That's why I'm suggesting that if we get this out now, they might be a little bit more kind to adhering to any sort of assurance that they give, at least in front of the court. If we can get it in front of the court now and let the courts know, listen, this is what they did to Dave Mendoza. Like you said, I have a contract. It wasn't fulfilled when I went there. So the courts make it very clear prior to transfer that these conditions must be fulfilled. And if not, Julian has recourse in court, that's both on the US side and on the British side, to enforce fulfillment. I think that's as best we can get from these guys, personally.
And I mean, the High Court justices, they accepted that, okay, well, we trust these U.S. assurances that they won't put him in SAMs. I mean, there are other things besides SAMs to, put someone in, right? I mean, Assange's lawyers already went through these. I've explained them before, like a communication management unit, a CMU, or a special housing unit, and so on. But I mean, just having been very near to ADX, having been, persecuted by this extradition system, what do you think they could do? And then claim they abided by the assurances. Like, we didn't put him in SAMs, but...
He's going to go, I can assure you 100%, he's going to go to a CMU. He's going to go to a communications management unit. That's 100%. That means all his correspondence, everything is going to be delayed normally by 1 month. Phone calls are very, very restricted. I assisted on a few extradition cases. One is a guy by the name of Mansour al-Qassar, who was a Syrian out of Spain. I think I mentioned. I
was going to ask you about those as well. Yeah.
Well, his, he's at a CMU with another gentleman that I've assisted. His name is Victor Boot. They were at the same CMU together. At any rate, it's very difficult. I could not communicate with them being here in Spain. They shot it back and said, nope, you're an ex-prisoner, and we don't know if you are still under supervision. But the rules are anybody who's an ex-prisoner that may still be under supervision cannot communicate with these people. So I had to do it via their attorneys, and their attorneys would through legal mail, which took months and months and months. Those guys, let me give you an example of the U.S. assurances. The U.S. gave Spain the assurance that Mansour al-Qassar would not be given a life sentence. Okay. When Mansour got to the United States, he went to trial and lost his trial. I think at that time he was 64, 65 years old. When he was sentenced to 30 years in prison. Now, mind you, in the US federal system, you do 95% of your time. So 30 years, you're going to do 28 years, 29 years. That would put Mansour at about 93 years old. You think that's not a life sentence? And when we contested that, you know what the US's response was? We kept our word. We didn't give him a life sentence. We gave him a determinate sentence, which is 30 years. Now, a determinate sentence could be 170 years. A determinate sentence can be 500 years. That's the game and the cynicalness of these people. I mean, the judges are all involved in this whole game too there. The federal judges play the same game along with the prosecutors. They know once you're in their jurisdiction, they know exactly what the game they're going to be playing with them. And they're going to do that with Julian, especially on this assurance that he can go to Australia. It's not going to happen unless Australia gives their agreement ahead of time. It's not going to happen.
You mentioned the determinate term of incarceration. They said the exact same thing to you when they gave you the assurance. So again, this is the diplomatic note from the U.S. Embassy in Madrid to the Spanish government, and they say that they will not seek a sentence of life imprisonment, and that they will do everything within their power to ensure that Mendoza receives a determinate sentence of incarceration. So, as you said, with Mansour al-Qassar, I mean, he's 64, around that age. They give him 30 years. That means maybe he comes out, and even if he does, he's close to 100, right? So this is one of the games they play, right? They say no life sentence, but we'll give you something that is akin to a life sentence. It just doesn't have the word life in it.
That's correct, and that's how their judiciary gets around it. They say, listen, we kept our promise. It doesn't say life here. It says it's a determinate amount of time. And believe me, when they send these diplomatic notes, they know exactly what they're doing, Richard. They're not just sending these out like, what's Lewis say, like Smarties or whatever heck. What was his response? They know exactly what they are doing. They know the verbiage that they need to use in order to get around it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and with Assange, as you know, I'm sure they're threatening him with up to 175 years in prison. He's 50. He just turned 50 recently. So I mean, we have 17 counts under the Espionage Act. There's one count, conspiracy to commit computer hacking. I mean, if they give him, they convict him only on 4 counts. He lands a 30, 40-year bid. That's like a life sentence, isn't it?
That's correct. And let me give you another thing. Assange, my suspicion is his character is a lot like mine. I'm not going to give up. I didn't give up for 1 second, and I sure hope as hell he doesn't give up for 1 second. But I know what they're playing there too. They're going to give him a long sentence, and then they're going to say, well, because you can't get transferred until your sentence is finalized. So they're going to tell him, if you want to get transferred, you got to accept the sentence. You can't appeal it to the Supreme Court. And that's a game that they're going to play. They're going to write him out for another 10 or 15 years until that gets decided in the Supreme Court, if it does get decided in the Supreme Court, because many times the Supreme Court won't take the case. They'll sit there and dock it for 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years. And then they just send you back a note later and say, well, we've decided not to accept this case. That's what my suspicion the game is going to be played here too. Once he gets sentenced, my suspicion is he can balance out the fact that, okay, well, maybe I should go to Australia, or if I choose to go to the Supreme Court, he's not going to be able to transfer to Australia, because one of the conditions on the Strasbourg Treaty transfer is your case must be finalized.
Mm-hmm. So the way it worked with you, they sentenced you, I believe it was November 2009. You're extradited in April 30th, 2009. November 2009, you're sentenced to 14 years. And you asked them to send you back, and they refused. They say you have to go to jail first, finalize the sentence, as you just said, and then you can apply for a treaty transfer, correct?
That's correct. And they also added one last caveat to that. I went to my facility, which was in Inglewood. Once they denied me, they put a secondary condition saying that I couldn't apply for another treaty transfer for another 2 more years. Well, where in the hell does that say that in the Strasbourg treaty transfer? So when I went to when I requested for my embassy, I said, why can't I apply? If the courts decide in Spain that I should be heading back tomorrow, why can't I reapply? And you know what the Spanish executive told me? Because that's what the Americans decided on. I said, well, how can they bring up these unilaterally force these conditions onto another country? I mean, they're the ones who always say other countries can't force us to unilaterally abide by their conditions. Well, they're doing it the same way to these other countries as they choose to do. I mean, it makes absolutely no sense. And I don't blame the Americans, quite honest with you, Richard. This whole game on my extraditions, I blame our countries that allow it to happen. They know, these judges all know what's going on here. The Spanish judges, the UK judges, the French judges, the German judges, they all know the game that's being played here with extraditions. I've tried time and time again to find out the exact numbers of how many European citizens have gone on extradition in one direction to the United States. Nobody wants to give me those numbers. And I can assure you that it's a lot more going that way than are coming this way.
Yeah. And I mean, you told me you saw dozens of just Spaniards being extradited, every year, was it? I think from Spain to the US. I mean,
that's correct.
What do you think I know we're just speculating here because they won't give us the figure, but just speculating, what do you think is the number of Spaniards extradited every year and Europeans every year to the US?
Spaniards, probably close to 100 a year. Europeans, it's probably in a total of, I don't know. I just speculating, but I would say probably near 1,000 a year. Coming this way, meaning Americans coming to Europe on extradition requests. Well, you guys just had something in the UK with this kid who got hit by this lady, American lady.
Harry Dunn.
Did he pass away?
He passed away, unfortunately.
Okay.
Yep. So
now I can assure you, if the shoe was on the other foot, that individual will be sitting in a U.S. prison right now. But it just shows you. It shows you the faucet only goes one way. And I blame our executives and our politicians and our justices, because they're as equally as responsible for this nonsense to allow this game to be continued.
Yeah, so just for those who are not aware, we're talking about Anne Sekulis. So she's a CIA spy agent. She was driving on the wrong side of the road in the UK, and she hit a guy named Harry Dunn. I think he was 17, and she killed him. She instantly killed him. She hit his motorcycle because she was driving on the wrong side of the road, and she fled to the U.S. And she pretended at first, if I recall correctly, she lied at first, saying that she had diplomatic immunity or something. They tried using a cover story. Then it came out she's a CIA agent. And Trump tried to buy off the parents with money and flat out refused to extradite her because, as you said, who's partly to blame? Who as well? The UK let her go. They let her go. They knew what was happening and they let her go. And just going back to what you said, David, over here with this caveat that you had to wait 2 years every time before you could apply again. This is your denial, the first one from 2010. So like we said, you got sentenced in November 2009 and you immediately applied in December. You wait 7 months, and July 2010, this is the letter you get from the U.S. Department of Justice. And they say here that they've refused the transfer. There is no administrative appeal. And unless otherwise noted above, the prisoner may reapply 2 years after this denial. So where does that say 2 years in the Convention on the Transfer of Sentenced Persons? Because I can't find it.
Believe me, Richard, I know that Strasbourg Treaty Transfer Convention like the back of my hand. There's nowhere in there that says anything like that. The Americans just place that on. And I'm going to give you another case of extradition request that Spain made of the United States. I don't know if you ever heard of the name of Jose Coso, or Coso, they say. He's a Galician reporter who was reporting in Baghdad. And it was probably 10 or 15 years ago. I don't recall the exact date.
It's 2003, I think, no?
Okay, 2003. The American military literally took out the top floor of this hotel that these reporters were staying at. And the rumor was, or speculation is, that is because Al Jazeera was stationed there and they were against the war at the time. Anyway, long story short, the family requested the same court, the Audiencia Nacional, to request the extradition of those military personnel, U.S. military personnel who fired the shot.
Yep.
First, the same Spanish court refused to do so. They shot it back and shot it back and shot it back. And finally, I think the Supreme Court required them to at least make application. It just shows you how scared these justices are and how they are submitted to the game. But at any rate, the family of Jose Coso was able to get the request in. You know what the Americans first, they didn't even respond to it. They made the submittal, they refused to respond to it. There was a judge here, very decent judge by the name of Santiago Pedrath, who insisted that they at least give a response. It took a few years, but they finally said, nope, we're not giving them. We're not giving them up. It just shows you. Now, again, I say, if the shoe was on the other foot, I wonder what would happen.
Yep. So, I mean, just again, another example of how it only goes one way in terms of extraditions and just, pursuit of justice, if you can call it that.
But again, Richard, excuse me, but again, I don't blame the Americans for this. I don't. The Americans are going to do what they can do as they do best, abuse law. I blame our judiciaries and our executives for allowing it to happen. That needs to stop. That needs to stop right away. And the people need to start to understand who, because yesterday it was me. Today it's Julian Assange. Tomorrow it could be any one of these guys or their family members. And then it's too late to scream and cry. Well, this is unfair.
Yeah. And I mean, right now in terms of your case, you got back to Spain. They gave you the full bid all of a sudden. So, instead of walking free, because you already done the time, they sentenced you retroactively. Is that legal in most jurisdictions?
It's absolutely. They know this. I mean, this is law 101. It's illegal under the Spanish Constitution. It's illegal under European Derecho de Humanos. I mean, human rights. Yep. It's illegal under any democratic. It's illegal under the U.S. Constitution also. I mean, name me a constitution that allows that to happen.
Right. So here's the order that the sentence. This is Grande Marlaska. So again, he's the judge in your case in 2015. He's now the Interior Minister, and in Spain. And here he says the sentence, the U.S. imposed sentence, cannot be changed. And his ruling, the logic of his ruling, as you mentioned before, was that, well, you were transferred in 2015, so he has to apply the law of 2015. The UN took your complaint, right? So here's the letter that they took your complaint against Spain. What are you hoping to achieve at the UN? What do you hope to get out of this complaint and that the UN can do on your behalf?
Well, we've asked for 3 remedies to be applied. One is compensation for the additional 7-8 years that I had to spend in prison. Second is that they publicly put in the newspapers here, in 3 of the largest newspapers, because we just know about Dave Mendoza. We don't know, there's a lot of people who've come behind Dave Mendoza who they've done the same thing to. I can assure you that. So it's just to inform the public that if somebody else has a claim, that my case allows them to make that claim against the Spanish executive and judiciary. And finally, the to change the law, to force the Spanish executive to change the law, the parliament or the Congress here, to say, hey, you cannot, if somebody gets transferred back, you can't call it the transfer date. That is when you apply the law. You have to apply the law of when the man was sentenced or the female was sentenced.
Right. And in terms of Assange, the High Court ruling today, I mean, what do you think is the right path, given that he has all the odds stacked against him? The decision from January has been overturned now. Doesn't seem to catch a break. What do you think is the best path, the best route forward to block the extradition? Do you think that it's citing your case, or there are other things that need to be packed in there? What do you think is the best option Assange has right now in his legal team?
I think Julian has a very difficult road now. I thought for sure, I didn't think the appellate court would do this. Now I think I don't know how the legal system works in England, but I would force the courts to make sure if the ruling says that the assurances, the Americans' assurances need to be respected and they give it credence, then I would make sure that they're as legally tight as possible. But I would take this case all the way up through, I don't know if you can go to the Supreme Court. His wife seems to think so. But then after that, there's also the European Court of Human Rights. As much as you can get definition, the better and safer it will be for him. And what I mean by definition is all the assurances just tightly locked. And if the courts do find it, at least the European Court of Human Rights and the Supreme Court do find that journalism is a crime, which it just astounds me, because tomorrow can be you. Remember this, Richard. I mean, you touch on issues that most of these journalists don't want to touch. My case, for example. I mean, I was scrubbed off the internet because people, the Americans didn't want to see my case out there. Like I said, that it's a travesty of justice right now. It's a travesty for justice for everybody.
Yeah, and this is what is so disturbing, because we're talking about, can the assurances be trusted and these sorts of things, but it sort of implies that he's guilty of a crime. I mean, he didn't really do anything. If you are going to jail him for this thing, you have to jail the New York Times, all the other people who were media partners with WikiLeaks. I'm not saying you should, but the logic here is that they're criminalizing journalism, essentially. Yeah. And it's just crazy that it's a debate like where he's going to go to jail. He shouldn't go to jail at all.
Right. This is definitely shooting a shot over the bow for all you guys, for every journalist out there. They're definitely, the Americans, when they do stuff like this, they do it for a reason. Pompeo and company, and Biden's no different. He was the designer of that crime bill, the 1995 crime bill. He's right. No different. This is to tell you guys, beware. And believe me, it's had an effect. I've spoken to a few journalists here in Spain, and they're shooken. A lot of them don't even want to touch me, because they want to be able to communicate with the U.S. Embassy. They want to be able to have good, fluid stories from the judiciary here. And if they touch me, if they expose this out there, they won't get that.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. David, is there anything else that we didn't touch on? Anything else you wanted to say? Just some general closing remarks about Assange, about your case, anything at all?
I really do hope that they put all these documents in front of the court. Anything I can do for Julian and his family, believe me, I will. I really hope that he stays strong. I've been in that black hole. There were days that you want to give up. Don't. Keep it up. It's a hard fight, but I know he's got it in him.
Yep, you guys are both fighters, and it's it's incredible what you've achieved. It's in the Spanish Supreme Court. I again remember what you told me, which is, they want the law to apply to the letter with David Mendoza, with Julian Assange. Why doesn't the law apply to the letter with them?
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Like I told you, Richard, I mean, in court, I heard time and time again the word of accountability. He must assume accountability for his behavior. What about the accountability for their behavior?
Mm-hmm.
Why aren't our courts, the European courts, the British courts, the Spanish courts, the French courts, the German courts, forcing the Americans accountability on their behavior? Just the fact that they planned a possibility of assassinating him in U.S. law, under U.S. law, is a crime, because that's called conspiracy. If I were to do something like that against a U.S. official or conspire anything of that nature, I would be probably doing a 200-year sentence in the United States.
Yeah.
Well, they conspired here. That means in Europe to do that to Julian. Why isn't anybody making them accountable for that? Right.
Absolutely. And just some closing remarks. I mean, because people are asking again, I'm just going to repeat it. The High Court ruled against Assange today. The United States won the appeal. They won 2 out of the 5 grounds. And the next move for Assange, this is, again, just a statement from his fiancée, is that, quote, "We will be seeking leave to appeal the High Court's decision to the Supreme Court." And there's a statement from his solicitors, from his attorneys that I just read out. And, it's, I think that your case, David, is as important as ever. And again, I want to make something clear. I don't think that it's just important because it relates to Assange. I think it's an incredible case on its own merits. And I've always said that, and I really believe that. But if in the context of Assange, because they cited your case, and I mean, you heard the response from Lewis, I do think it's really important that the High Court consider, what happened to you, because you were given very similar assurances, and they were diplomatic ones. Lewis made a point that they're not dished out like Smarties, right? Well, you got some diplomatic assurances, and there was a contract, and they violated them, and all these documents here in the article, I mean, they haven't been presented in court at all. So, whatever the next move is, I really think that, because they mentioned the CIA plot to kill Assange, right? I mean, we knew from the employees of UC Global who were doing security at the embassy about this, because I was at the Old Bailey. I heard the anonymous testimony. And in addition to that, we had this investigative story from Yahoo News about the CIA plotting, or at least considering to kill Assange. And they did mention that in court. I think this article has some very compelling evidence, not opinion, evidence about how you were treated, you were mistreated by the U.S. government. Your assurances were broken. The assurances given to Spain, the contract was broken. And I think it's really a lesson, not just for Assange, but all other extraditions and countries that are letting extraditions continue to the U.S. So I guess we'll leave it at that now, and I'll of course have all the latest news about Assange's case coming forward. David, I'm so grateful for you, coming on the program today. As I said, there's another interview, a longer one that I'll be uploading with us together. And if people want to read the article, the link is going to be in the description. Anything else you want to add, David?
No, honestly, I very much appreciate who you are. You're an honest journalist. I mean,
thank you.
There's few of you left out there, believe me when I tell you that. And I think the more attention prior to Julian, if ultimately he goes, the more attention we give to this, the less the possibilities, don't get me wrong, they're going to try and do everything they can, but the less possibilities they will to try and screw Assange. So we need to put it out there as much as we possibly can. And the article you wrote, I read, and it's a very, very well written article. I appreciate your honesty, and I appreciate who you are.
Thank you, David. again, likewise, and I'm so grateful for you coming on and explaining this again to everyone. Thanks for everything, David. We'll keep in touch, and I'll talk to you later. Thanks for everyone. Okay. Thanks to everyone for tuning in. All the links will be below, and you can watch this on replay. And I'll see you guys next time. Take care. Bye-bye.
Okay, thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye, David.